Okay. Let me see. Wow. Hi, everyone. People are joining. I am going to invite Eric once I figure out how to do that. Oops. View request, go live. Cool. Okay, I think Eric is in the process of joining. Yay! We did it! Oh my God. Hi, Eric.
Hi, Emily. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Great. Now that we've connected, I feel terrific.
We are live on Instagram. This is awesome. So it looks like we've got about 60 people here. Hi, everyone who's joining. I'm Emily. I'm the Compost Program Manager at GrowNYC, and I am joined today by Eric Goldstein. Eric, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Eric Goldstein. I'm the New York City Environment Director at the Natural Resources Defense Council. Nice to see you all this afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
And today we're going to be talking about how New York City can reinvest in zero waste infrastructure in the wake of COVID-19. So I'll start by just saying a little bit about the work that we're doing at GrowNYC. Our compost program, which hopefully everyone who's watching is a participant, we strive to make composting second nature for all New Yorkers by operating residential food scrap drop-off sites and partnering with community composting facilities to make compost locally. And we've been doing this work since 2011. So far, we've diverted over 18 million pounds of food scraps from landfills. So that's partly the food scraps of the people joining us here today. And Eric, can you talk about how your work at NRDC relates to composting and what kind of compost related work you're doing?
Sure. So as many of you probably know, NRDC is a national environmental group, and we've had a team of lawyers and scientists working here in New York City since our founding in 1970. One big piece of our work has been focusing on solid waste reform. And the overall objective has been to reduce New York's reliance on landfilling and incineration, and instead make the four cornerstones of a sustainable waste policy: waste prevention, composting, recycling, and equity. And obviously one of those cornerstones is composting. Composting makes sense, as probably everyone tuning in knows, for a lot of reasons. Among them, if we're ever going to solve the climate crisis, we've got to stop sending food waste and yard waste to landfills where they generate methane, an extremely potent global warming gas. So for the last 6 or 7 years, we have been working to change city policy to adopt laws and programs at the Sanitation Department, and cooperating with great organizations like GrowNYC to build up New York's composting, both in the residential sector that we'll be talking about today, as well as in the commercial side.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. You answered my first question for you, which is, why is composting important to you? Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, it's really important for a lot of reasons. Food waste, yard waste make up the single largest portion of the residential waste stream. More than a third of our waste that we toss into the trash baskets are these organics. And we send them to landfills and incinerators. That's number one, expensive. And number two, as I said, generates a lot of pollution. We send food waste to a landfill, it creates organics, it creates methane, which is a global warming gas. If we send food scraps, yard waste to incinerators, it adds to the pollution burden. Oftentimes that pollution burden comes back to New York City, and these landfills and incinerators are often located in lower income communities and communities of color. So there's also an environmental justice impact to all of this. The idea is to have local, healthy composting activities that are supportive of the community instead of burdening folks who already have gotten more than their fair share of environmental problems. And then finally, of course, we take food scraps and yard waste and we turn them into a very useful product that can be used as fertilizer, soil stabilizers. We can put it on street trees. We can use it for our household plants, put it in our parks. So we're taking something that used to be thought of as trash and turning it into a useful product.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. That hit on so many of the reasons. I feel like a couple more that we hear at drop-off sites is a lot of people are composting because they're concerned about cleanliness, and that like separating your food scraps from the rest of your trash is a great way to keep your kitchen clean and kind of stop feeding rodents, which we all know is a big problem in New York City. Let's see. Can you tell us a little bit about the Save Our Compost Coalition? When and why that was formed, what it's done, and how you're involved in it?
Sure. As I indicated, there were a couple of laws that the city council passed a number of years ago to spur composting activities both in the residential waste stream and in the commercial waste stream. And there had been a pilot project that was doing curbside collections of food waste. Many of you have seen those round bins in certain parts of the city. There has also been a community composting project underway since the 1990s, and that relied on volunteer groups, including GrowNYC, which you know, Emily, has been collecting food scraps dropped off at the green markets around the city for many years. When the COVID crisis last spring, the city hall folks, in their short-sighted judgment, decided to completely eliminate funding for all activities. So they stopped in midstream the pilot project for curbside collections, and they had proposed to zero out funding for all of these community compost drop-off sites. And there was an outcry from people in every corner of the city, diverse constituencies, saying, this is crazy. We know that it's sustainable to compost. We want to do something about it. And so a number of groups got together, including NRDC and GrowNYC, and we all, working with the New York Law for the Public Interest, helped bring everyone together to form an ad hoc coalition called Save Our Compost. Last spring, between April and June, we did a significant amount of out to our city council representatives, and they responded by restoring $2.8 million to the budget last year. That was enough to barely keep the patient alive. But as a result of that, about 100 drop-off composting locations were reinstalled. And so at least the most dedicated New Yorkers who wanted to keep sending their organics to composting facilities use those facilities. And this coalition has stayed active every couple of weeks via Zoom. We're continuing to put this year's budget for restoration funds. Now that the city is coming back economically, huge windfalls, necessary monies coming in from the federal government, composting is an investment that will pay off for city taxpayers over the long term. And we are working hard to get community composting restored this year's to its pre-COVID levels. And of course, still working on legislation that would make curbside composting phased in, brought back. Let's figure out what went right and what went wrong with the old program, bring it back over the next number of years, and really have New York as a leader in sustainability.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. Yeah, so this time last year, there was no way to compost in New York City because all of the funding had been cut. And then thanks to Save Our Compost, the city council restored that $2.8 million just for community composting. But it was still really drastic cut in services. So for the last year, it's been harder than ever to compost in New York City, but we've still been able to do so much amazing work. So I just wanted to highlight some of what we've done at GrowNYC with our much smaller than usual budget. After we did get partially refunded, it was just 25% of our previous budget. So with that money, we were able to reopen 16 of our former 76 food scrap drop-off sites, hire 20 compost coordinators and drivers, engage 150 volunteers, and collect over 20 tons of food scraps for composting every single week. And last week, we actually surpassed 1 million pounds of food scraps collected just since reopening in September. So just during COVID-19, which is incredible. We've seen a huge increase in participation at the sites that we've been able to reopen. So on average, collections are up by 42% at our reopened sites. And I just want to shout out some neighborhoods where they're even higher. So collections are up by 60% in the Upper West Side, 73% in Bed-Stuy, an 80% increase in Fort Greene, 108% increase in the South Bronx, and the biggest growth we've seen is 152% increase in participation at Carroll Gardens Green Market. So that's, yeah, it's really exciting, but it's also really concerning. The growth in participation, I think, represents both demand for composting in New York City, but also the lack of opportunities to do it. So a lot of the people who are coming to our drop-off sites are coming from really far away, or, you know, saving their food scraps for like a month because it's really inconvenient. And it's frustrating because I've been doing this work for 7 years now, and our focus has always been to expand and to increase access and to make it easier to compost. And this year, it's really just been like, how do we do the most possible with the least possible? So thanks to everyone here who has been bringing us their food scraps, and really pushing that increase. Eric,
And I just, one of the amazing things about the whole community composting effort is how the nonprofit community has stepped up to help and work with GrowNYC. And so groups like the Lower East Side Ecology Center, Big Reuse, Red Hook Farms, there are groups all over the city that have been working hard, including the Botanic Gardens in Brooklyn, Bronx, and Staten Island. And so it really is a community effort to build up composting, something that the public at the grassroots level understands and has always been ahead of the elected officials on this.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. And I think another really important thing to note is that the drop-offs that I'm talking about are such a small portion of what's going on in the city. Right now, there are over 100 food scrap drop-off sites open in New York City. And more than half of them are operated by volunteers. A lot of them are receiving some support from New York City Compost Project, which operates composting facilities. So they actually make compost with the food scraps. That's groups like Big Reuse, Earth Matter, Lower East Side Ecology Center, Queens Botanic Garden, Snug Harbor, New York Botanic Garden. I think I just mentioned them all. And Brooklyn Botanic Garden. And those are the places where we bring food scraps too. So if you go to our website, you can see every drop-off site and where those food scraps are processed today. And we update that constantly as things change. And our work wouldn't be possible if there weren't places making compost in New York City.
So that's important.
Yeah.
It's GrowNYC plays a pivotal role in collecting food waste at drop-off sites in the green markets. But there are the composting project nonprofits who actually process it, like Big Reuse in the Lower East Side Ecology Center and those other sites that you mentioned.
Right.
The important thing to take away on this issue, though, is that Big Reuse, which is right under the Queensboro Bridge in Long Island City, and the Lower East Side Ecology Center, which has its operation in East River Park. Those two facilities, which are wonderful models of community activism and have been working so successfully, they are threatened with eviction because for the past year, the Parks Department has said that they don't represent recreational uses or community uses. And so there's an effort underway to kick these wonderful nonprofits out of their sites that enjoy political support from the neighborhoods and communities. And it's really essential that Mayor de Blasio and City Hall step in, keep these places, Big Reuse and Lower East Side Ecology Center, keep them in their neighborhoods and their communities where they're serving residents for years and years, decades in the case of Lower East Side Ecology Center. Mm-hmm. So if folks wanted to do one thing immediately to help composting, other than begin composting themselves and taking some of your food scraps to the green market drop sites or other drop sites in their neighborhoods, one thing they could do is let Mayor de Blasio and City Hall Council know that community composting is important, and that they ought to ensure that these beloved composting operations, which teach kids about take food scraps from their communities and turn them into product, that these two sites, Big Reuse and Lower East Side Ecology Center, ought to stay right where they are, or at least for neighborhoods.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. And it's really important because it's directly connected to New Yorkers' ability to drop off their food scraps. So half of the food scraps that GrowNYC is collecting today are processed at the Big Reuse Queensbridge site alone. The drop-offs at Union Square Green Market, Tompkins Square Green Market, Stuytown Green Market, those all go to Lower East Side Ecology Center. So a lot of what we talk about in the compost world is local processing capacity. And that means, where are the places where we're bringing the food scraps once we collect them? For us, we're environmentalists, so our priority is to keep them as close as possible. And we're also concerned with doing the best possible thing with them. So we love community composting. We love keeping it local. We love teaching people how to make compost, and we love distributing that finished product back to the community. And those sites are the cornerstone of that work. And they're also just like national examples of how to do things really well. So yeah, we're really concerned about the future of those sites. And thank you, Eric, for bringing that up. Eric, so last week, the mayor made some big compost-related announcements on Earth Day, and we definitely need to talk about that. Could you give us just a recap of what the mayor announced last week?
Sure. Last week, the mayor essentially said two things. In view of the outpouring of pressure from the public, they are planning to restore a curbside collection program for some people starting in the fall. If you were a sanitation district or a community board district that had previously received curbside collection, your building manager, or you, if you live in private residence, can register. You have to now register or enroll in the program or re-enroll. And that will begin in August. And in theory, collection will begin as early as October. The second thing the mayor announced was that they were going to expand the number of community compost sites from a little over 100, what it has been, maybe up to 120, to about 200 over the next number of months. And obviously one objective is to make sure that every community, city, environmental justice community, lower income neighborhoods are served and at least have the opportunity to have a drop-off site somewhere in their community. So those are a small step forward as far as they go. But of course, there are problems, both elements. And ultimately, unless the mayor introduces legislation that will phase in over the next number of years a universal curbside collection program for all New Yorkers, as well as finding ways to maintain a vibrant community drop operation and composting right in the city, because as you note, Emily, there are real environmental advantages to having composting right here, low transportation costs. But unless the mayor introduces legislation, the goal he and his administration announced a number of years ago with fanfare, which was zero waste, really 90% of waste out of landfills by 2030. That goal will never be achieved. Composting for all New York is the cornerstone of achieving the zero goal and of achieving our goal of reducing global warming emissions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eric. Yeah, I just want to highlight, just so people know what it means when we say that curbside composting is coming back in the fall, like what that means for you. My understanding of it, and it's right now it's a policy goal, but it's not in the city budget until the city council approves the city budget. So we'll see what happens. But right now it's going to be a smaller curbside composting program than it was before COVID. So we're talking about the brown bins. And it's going to be opt-in and demand-based. So anyone in New York City can fill out a form saying that they're interested in getting it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you will get it, and it doesn't mean you'll get it immediately. The Department of Sanitation will add buildings to a route as soon as there's enough demand in that area to justify a truck on the road. And the enrollment process, so you can fill out the form saying that you want the service in August, and the service will start rolling out in October and grow over time as demand demands.
I see, Emily, I see there was one question about composting for small businesses.
Okay.
And if there is a vibrant group of dedicated composters who are working to expand opportunities for small business composting. And if the viewer would like to get with Meredith Ficarelli, she is one of the leaders in community composting for small businesses. It can be reached at commongroundcompost.com, commongroundcompost.com.
And they also have an Instagram, Common Ground. They're awesome because they both are hauling food scraps, but also helping businesses like with consulting. So they'll help negotiate a contract with a carter, even if it's not going to be them. So they're really, really helpful. And I should probably clarify, like in New York City, there's a really strong divide between residential waste and commercial waste. So residential is your apartment, a school, a nonprofit, churches, but then everything else, businesses, so restaurants, bodegas, office buildings, arenas, supermarkets, those are commercial. So there's a whole different private carting industry that services commercial establishments, whereas the Department of Sanitation and their funded partners, including GrowNYC, service residential establishments, so people's apartments, and people's household food waste. So, yeah, we get that question all the time, and at our food scrap drop-offs, we are not supposed to be taking any commercial waste because commercial establishments hire private carters to take their waste, and there are private companies that offer compost hauling services. So Common Ground Compost, check them out. They'll help you navigate.
Great. Just one last point about larger businesses. The whole commercial waste operation in New York is in the process of a major transformation. There was legislation passed by the city council, signed by the mayor, that will create a new zoned system for commercial waste handling that the sanitation department is beginning now to phase in. So the city is going to be 20 zones. Contracts will be awarded to no more than 3 carters in every zone. And one of the factors that the sanitation department will look at deciding who gets those contracts is the extent to which they are composting the food wastes that they collect from commercial businesses and restaurants and all. So we hope and expect that that operation, which will have a lot of environmental benefits, including labor safety, down on diesel truck traffic, crazy routing where you've got so many different going down the same block. Another benefit of this commercial waste reform in setting up the zone system will be a way of incentivizing the carters to collect food scraps and organics and send them to composting facilities.
So I'm seeing we've got another question from the audience asking about composting on Governor's Island. So the people composting on Governor's Island, it's called Earth Matter. It's one of the New York City Compost Project host sites, and they have been one of the instrumental partners to GrowNYC since the beginning. Right now, about 40% of the food scraps we're collecting are going to Governor's Island on Mondays on a ferry to be turned into compost. And they also have a flock of chickens that get to peck at the food scraps before they even go in the compost pile. So that's really awesome because if you haven't heard of the food waste pyramid, Google it. And it's kind of like the regular food pyramid with the best thing at the top and the thing you should do the least of at the bottom. And the best thing is reducing food waste from the source. So not overproducing, not throwing away edible food. The second best thing is feeding people. So rescuing food that would be wasted and redistributing it to food. Third best is feeding animals. So that is what's happening at Earth Matter when we feed the chickens your food scraps. And then next is community composting. So that's what we're doing mostly. Way at the bottom of the food waste pyramid is landfilling. So that's what we're trying to avoid. That's the reason why we're asking you to separate your food scraps and bring them to us so that we can pull them up higher onto the food waste pyramid. Have we gotten any more questions? It is 4:28, so we're almost done with our live, Eric.
Well, I would just, if I could add just one thing, Emily, it would be this, and you touched on it. The best thing that we all can do if we want to both reduce climate problems and have a more sustainable planet and also help our fellow New Yorkers is to generate food waste in the first place.
Yeah.
And, participate in the growing number of programs where one could donate food. You know, we have so many New Yorkers who are hungry, and yet, according to national statistics, Americans throw out 40%. We waste 40% of the food that's grown throughout the country. So we all can do it individually. We need government. We need businesses to help. All of us can do a lot to reduce the amount of waste and to get to people who most need it.
Awesome. Thank you. You know what? I think that's a perfect way to wrap this up. So thank you everyone who came. Thank you to the folks who donated. That your donations will help support the GrowNYC compost program. So thank you so much. And thanks, Eric, for taking 30 minutes to talk to me on Instagram.
It was a pleasure.
It's been so fun. Okay, I'll talk to you soon.
Take
Bye.
care.